The auditorium reeked of sweat, stale popcorn, and heavyweight egos. Hundreds of massive, muscle-bound fighters scoffed when a slender 5'7" outsider stepped onto the mat. They snickered at his size, they mocked his stance. But then he moved, and in a fraction of a second the entire arena stopped breathing. It was August 2nd, 1964. The Long Beach Municipal Auditorium in California was a pressure cooker of testosterone, traditionalism, and deep-seated arrogance. This was the inaugural Long Beach International Karate Championships, the brainchild of Ed Parker, a towering figure in the American martial arts scene. Ed had built a reputation as the father of American Kenpo, a man who commanded respect from the toughest brawlers, street fighters, and disciplined black belts across the country. He had invited the best of the best to showcase their skills, creating a melting pot of styles and a breeding ground for massive, fragile egos. In the 1960s, American martial arts was a domain ruled by giants. The prevailing belief was simple: mass equals power. If you wanted to hit hard, you needed to be big. The men warming up on the canvas that day were Walking Mountain's 220-pound brutes, breaking stacks of ice, shattering pine boards, and driving their knuckles into bricks. It was an era of rigid stances, choreographed katas, and the absolute conviction that the old ways were the only ways. Sitting in the front row amidst the smell of deep heat rub and canvas dust was William Dozier. William was a high-powered Hollywood producer, a man whose word could mint millionaires overnight. He was currently developing a television show called The Green Hornet, and he was desperately hunting for someone to play a character named Kato. But William was growing incredibly bored. He had spent the last 2 hours watching oversized men scream, flex, and break inanimate objects. It was theatrical, sure, but it felt stiff, slow, uninspired. Beside him sat Jay Sebring, the legendary Hollywood hairstylist whose client list included Steve McQueen and Paul Newman. Jay had dragged William to the sweaty arena. "Just wait," Jay told the skeptical producer, leaning over the wooden barricade. "Ed Parker told me there's a kid from Seattle you have to see. He's not like these guys. He's different." Backstage, different was an understatement. Bruce Lee, a 23-year-old college dropout who had recently relocated from Hong Kong via Seattle, was tying his shoes. At a mere 5'7" and weighing barely 135 pounds, Bruce looked like a stiff breeze could knock him over. He wore thick horn-rimmed glasses and a traditional black jacket. To the heavyweights pacing the hallways, Bruce looked like a bookworm who had taken a wrong turn on his way to the local library. A few feet away stood Richard, a 230-pound heavyweight champion with fists the size of canned hams. Richard represented the old guard. He watched Bruce doing light fluid stretches with a look of undisguised contempt. "Hey, kid," Richard sneered, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You're lost? The spelling bee is down the hall. This is for fighters." Bruce didn't flinch. He didn't puff out his chest. He simply adjusted his glasses, offered a polite, almost pitying smile, and went back to his stretches. But internally, the stakes couldn't have been higher for Bruce. His wife Linda was at home, and they were trying to build a life from scratch. Bruce had no money, no Hollywood connections, and a revolutionary philosophy about combat that the traditional martial arts world considered pure blasphemy. He believed that classical martial arts were a mess of desperation bound by robotic routines that would fail in a real fight. He believed in fluidity, in being like water, but preaching philosophy wouldn't pay the rent. He needed to prove it, and he had to prove it in front of the most hostile audience imaginable. When Ed Parker finally took the microphone and announced Bruce's name, the polite applause from the crowd of several thousand was laced with visible confusion. As Bruce stepped out under the harsh, blinding arena lights, the murmurs began instantly. William Dozier leaned back in his folding chair, crossing his arms. "This is the guy, Jay? He's a twig. My leading man is going to look like he's fighting a stiff wind. Just watch," Jay repeated, his eyes locked on the stage. Bruce walked to the center of the mat. He didn't bow in the rigid robotic manner of the Japanese stylists who had preceded him. Instead, he took a relaxed, almost casual stance. He grabbed a microphone. He didn't start with a scream or a violent display. He started with a lecture. Most martial arts are like swimming on dry land. Bruce's voice rang out through the crackling PA system, carrying a distinct, confident edge. They teach you how to move, but they put you in a straitjacket of tradition. To truly fight, you must be formless, shapeless, like water. A few guys in the back bleachers groaned. Richard, standing near the tunnel entrance, openly laughed. "We're here for a fight, not poetry." Someone shouted from the upper deck. The crowd chuckled. They were losing patience. They wanted to see someone get hit. They wanted to see dominance. Bruce heard the laughter. A sharp electric shift occurred in his demeanor. The polite, philosophical young man vanished. He handed the microphone to an official. He took off his thick glasses. His eyes, now unshielded, were terrifyingly sharp. The relaxed posture disappeared, replaced by a coiled, vibrating intensity. "You want to see water?" Bruce said softly to the men near the front. "I will show you a tsunami." The atmosphere in the Long Beach auditorium was thick with skepticism. Bruce dropped to the floor to begin his demonstration, but instead of settling into a standard push-up position, he extended his right arm, tucking his left behind his back. Then he lifted his entire body weight off the ground using only 2 fingers of his right hand, his thumb, and his index finger. The murmurs in the crowd died down, replaced by a ripple of genuine surprise. Performing a one-arm push-up was a feat of strength. Doing it on 2 fingers while weighing 135 pounds defied the basic laws of physics the heavyweights believed in. He pumped out several repetitions with effortless, machine-like precision. William Dozier sat up slightly, uncrossing his arms. "Okay," the producer muttered. "He has balance. But can he hit?" Bruce stood up, brushing the canvas dust from his knuckles. He had their attention, but he didn't have their respect. Not yet. He knew exactly what it would take to shatter the illusion of size and power that these men worshipped. He stepped to the center of the mat and called out to the audience. "I need a volunteer. Someone big. Someone solid." From the front row, Bob Baker stood up. Bob was a highly respected martial artist from Stockton, California. He tipped the scales at a rock-solid 190 pounds. Bob was no slouch. He was a tough, seasoned fighter who had taken hits from the biggest men in the sport. He jogged onto the mat with a confident, almost amused grin on his face. He liked Bruce, but like everyone else, he didn't believe a guy giving up 60 pounds could do much damage without a running start. Bruce positioned Bob in the center of the mat. He asked a few assistants to bring out a heavy wooden chair and place it directly behind Bob. "Plant your feet firmly," Bruce instructed Bob. "Brace yourself. Do not let me move you." Bob widened his stance, dropping his center of gravity. He flexed his legs and braced his core, turning himself into a human brick wall. "I'm ready, Bruce. Give it your best shot." Bruce stepped directly in front of Bob. The crowd leaned in. What was his strategy? Was he going to spin, jump, take a massive wind-up? Instead, Bruce did the unthinkable. He extended his right arm fully, resting his knuckles lightly against Bob's sternum. A collective groan of disappointment echoed through the arena. Richard, watching from the tunnel, threw his hands up in disgust. "What is this? A magic trick?" he yelled. Bruce then pulled his fist back exactly 1 inch. The crowd fell dead silent. The concept was absurd. How could anyone generate force with 1 inch of space? The heavyweights in the room relied on massive, sweeping hooks, rotating their entire bodies like wrecking balls. What Bruce was proposing wasn't just unorthodox, it was an insult to everything they knew about biomechanics. "This is going to be embarrassing," William Dozier whispered to Jay Sebring. Bruce didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at William Dozier. His eyes were completely hollowed out, staring right through Bob Baker's chest as if the man were made of glass. In Bruce's mind, the punch did not start in the knuckles. It started in the floor. He grounded his right heel, sending a microscopic tremor up his calf, through his thigh, and into his hip. The hip snapped with the velocity of a firing pin, transferring the kinetic energy into his shoulder, down his arm, and finally into the single inch of space between his fist and Bob's chest. Crack. It didn't sound like a punch. It sounded like a wooden baseball bat snapping in half. The visual that followed defied reality. Bob Baker, a 190-pound wall of muscle, didn't just stumble back. His feet completely left the canvas. The sheer, concentrated violence of the impact launched him backwards, as if he had been struck by a cannonball. Bob flew backward, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He crashed violently into the wooden chair placed behind him. But the momentum didn't stop there. The chair tipped backward, and Bob's momentum carried him tumbling over it, sending him sliding across the slick wooden floor of the arena until he finally slammed into the far barricade. He lay there for a moment gasping, his hands instinctively clutching his chest, his face pale. For 3 entire seconds, the Long Beach auditorium was as silent as a graveyard. No one breathed. No one moved. The heavyweights standing in the tunnels froze. The men who had been laughing a minute ago stood with their mouths hanging open, their eyes darting from the small Chinese man in the center of the mat to the 190-pound fighter groaning on the floor. Bruce Lee didn't celebrate. He didn't scream or flex his muscles. He simply lowered his hand, his breathing completely even, his face a mask of absolute calm. He looked out into the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the audience. He looked directly at the section where Richard and the other heavyweights were standing. He didn't need to say a word. The message was deafeningly clear. Your size means nothing. Your traditions are dead. Suddenly the silence was broken by the sound of furious applause. It didn't come from the crowd. It came from the front row. William Dozier, the Hollywood producer who had been bored out of his mind, was on his feet, chatting wildly. His eyes were wide, practically shining with dollar signs and adrenaline. He grabbed Jay Sebring by the shoulder, shaking him. "Jay, did you see that? Did you see the speed? The camera wouldn't even be able to catch that." "I told you," Jay grinned, leaning back. "He's a star." Backstage, the reality of what had just happened began to set in. Bob Baker was helped to his feet by officials. For weeks afterward, Bob would complain of a deep, throbbing pain in his chest, warning other fighters never to volunteer for Bruce's demonstrations. When Bruce walked off the mat and headed back into the tunnels, the atmosphere had entirely changed. The heavyweights who had mocked him, who had told him to go back to a spelling bee, actively stepped out of his way. They flattened themselves against the concrete walls to let him pass. Richard, the 230-pound champion, couldn't even meet Bruce's eyes. He looked down at the floor, his face flushed with embarrassment and awe. Bruce had walked into the arena as a joke, an outsider preaching madness. In a single second, with a single inch of movement, he had rewritten the rules of combat. But as William Dozier rushed backstage to shove a business card into Bruce's hand, Bruce knew that this was only the beginning. He had conquered the martial arts world. Now he had to conquer Hollywood, a beast far more treacherous than any heavyweight fighter. William Dozier kept his promise. Within weeks of the Long Beach demonstration, Bruce Lee was sitting in a plush, air-conditioned office at 20th Century Fox. The walls were adorned with posters of Batman, Dozier's crown jewel, and the heavy mahogany desk was cluttered with contracts. Bruce signed on the dotted line to play Kato, the martial arts-wielding chauffeur in the Green Hornet. To the outside world, he had made it. He had bypassed the grueling audition circuits and landed a co-starring role on a major network television show. But Hollywood, Bruce quickly discovered, was just as rigid and arrogant as the traditional martial arts heavyweights he had humiliated on the mat. The drama began on the very first day of filming. The director yelled, "Action!" and the cameras, loaded with expensive 35mm film, began to roll. Bruce's co-star Van Williams, a tall, handsome, quintessential American leading man, delivered his lines. Then came the fight choreography. A group of stuntmen rushed Bruce. Bruce reacted instinctively. He pivoted, snapped a sidekick into the chest of the first attacker, trapped the arm of the second, and delivered a blindingly fast backfist to the third. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. Cut! Cut! The director bellowed, stepping out from behind the camera, his face flushed with frustration. He marched over to Bruce. "What was that?" "I didn't see anything. The camera didn't see anything." Bruce looked at the director, genuinely confused. "I hit them. Like I am supposed to." "You're a blur, kid," the director sighed, rubbing his temples. Film cameras of the 1960s recorded at 24 frames per second. Bruce's strikes were physically traveling faster than the shutter speed could capture. On film, it looked like he was standing still, and the stuntmen were simply falling over for no reason. "You have to slow down," the director ordered. "Make it bigger, swing wider. Let the audience see the punch." It was a crushing blow to Bruce's philosophy. He had spent his entire life stripping away useless theatrical movements to become as efficient and deadly as possible. Now the Hollywood machine was ordering him to put the swimming on dry land routines back into his repertoire. But Bruce swallowed his pride. He adapted. He slowed his kicks down, telegraphing his movements just enough for the lenses to catch the impact. Despite the restrictions, something unprecedented happened. When The Green Hornet aired, the American public didn't care about the titular hero. Their eyes were glued to the masked sidekick. The studio's mailroom was suddenly overwhelmed. Thousands of letters poured in every week, completely ignoring Van Williams and demanding more of Kato. But the executives in their high-rise offices couldn't handle the paradigm shift. A Chinese actor stealing the spotlight from a white, all-American lead was not part of the script. In a shocking twist of fate, despite Kato's soaring popularity, The Green Hornet was unceremoniously cancelled after a single season. The network deemed it a failure. Bruce was devastated. He was a father now, with a second child on the way, and his Hollywood dream had evaporated just as quickly as it had materialized. He was reduced to taking humiliating bit parts, playing a karate instructor on Ironside, and making a brief appearance on Blondie. He was treated as a novelty, a prop to be brought out for a quick stunt and then shoved back into the shadows. To make ends meet, Bruce opened a private martial arts studio in Los Angeles. His client list became a who's who of Hollywood royalty. He charged astronomical fees, up to $250 an hour, to train megastars like Steve McQueen, James Coburn, and Oscar-winning screenwriter Sterling Silliphant. They trained in Bruce's backyard, sweating under the California sun. McQueen, known for his tough guy persona, was completely humbled by Bruce. Coburn was mesmerized by his philosophy. These massive stars treated Bruce as a master, a peer, and a genius. Yet, when Bruce walked into a studio casting office, he was treated like a second-class citizen. Refusing to be defeated, Bruce partnered with Sterling Silliphant to pitch a revolutionary television concept to Warner Brothers. He envisioned a show called The Warrior, following a Shaolin monk who wanders the American Old West, using profound Eastern philosophy and devastating martial arts to solve problems. It was the perfect vehicle. It was deep, it was action-packed, and it was tailored specifically for Bruce to star in. He took the pitch to Tom Kuhn, the head of Warner Brothers. Television. Kuhn smiled, nodded, and praised the concept. Bruce left the meeting feeling electric. Finally, he was going to be the leading man. A few weeks later, the phone rang. It was his agent. Warner Brothers was moving forward with a show strikingly identical to The Warrior. They had renamed it Kung Fu. "That's great," Bruce said, gripping the receiver tightly. "When do we start shooting?" There was a heavy, agonizing pause on the other end of the line. "Bruce, they didn't cast you." Bruce's heart plummeted. "Who did they cast?" "David Carradine." The betrayal was staggering. David Carradine was a white actor who had absolutely zero martial arts training. He was a dancer. The executives had looked at Bruce's undeniable talent, stolen his concept, and decided that the American public was simply not ready to accept a Chinese leading man. The message from Hollywood was absolute. You will only ever be the sidekick. The psychological toll of the kung fu betrayal was heavy, but the physical blow that struck Bruce the following year nearly erased him from history entirely. It was August 1970. Bruce was in his private weight room, pushing himself to the absolute limit. He loaded a barbell with 135 pounds, his exact body weight, and placed it across his shoulders to perform a set of good mornings, a grueling exercise designed to strengthen the lower back. He bent forward at the waist. As he engaged his muscles to lift the heavy iron back up, a sickening, terrifying pop echoed through the silent room. Bruce collapsed, the iron plates crashing violently to the floor. An excruciating, blinding pain shot from his lower spine down his legs. He couldn't move. He lay paralyzed on his own floor, gasping for air. At the hospital, the diagnosis delivered by the specialists was a death sentence for a martial artist. He had sustained severe damage to his fourth sacral nerve. The lead doctor stood at the foot of Bruce's hospital bed, his expression grim. "You need to prepare yourself, Mr. Lee," the doctor said flatly. "You will be confined to this bed for at least 6 months. You will never practice martial arts again. You will be lucky if you can walk without a severe limp for the rest of your life." For a man whose entire existence was predicated on movement, on being like water, being told he was permanently broken was a psychological torture worse than any physical pain. For the first few weeks, Bruce descended into a dark, suffocating depression. He stared at the ceiling, wondering if the heavyweights he had mocked in Long Beach were finally having the last laugh. He had been rejected by Hollywood, and now his own body had betrayed him. But Bruce Lee did not know how to surrender. Confined to a customized bed, staring up at a mirror his wife Linda had installed so he could at least see the room, Bruce demanded a pen and paper. If he could not move his fists, he would move his mind. Over the next 6 excruciating months, pushing through waves of agonizing nerve pain, Bruce wrote furiously. He poured every ounce of his knowledge, his philosophy, and his combat theories onto the page. Those frantic, pain-filled writings would eventually be published as the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, the definitive Bible of mixed martial arts. Against all medical odds and logic, Bruce forced himself out of the bed. Through sheer terrifying willpower and a self-designed rehabilitation program, he taught himself to walk again, then to stretch, then miraculously to kick. He was in chronic pain, a pain he would hide from the world until his dying day. But he was moving. He had survived his broken back, but his career was still in ruins. He realized a harsh, uncompromising truth: if he stayed in America, he would die waiting for a permission slip from studio executives that would never come. If he wanted to be a king, he had to build his own kingdom. In the summer of 1971, Bruce packed a single suitcase and boarded a flight to Hong Kong. When he landed at Kai Tak Airport, he expected to fade into anonymity. Instead, he was mobbed. Unbeknownst to Bruce, the Green Hornet had been airing in syndication in Hong Kong. The locals didn't care about the masked white guy. They watched it for Bruce. In Hong Kong, the show wasn't called The Green Hornet. It was advertised as The Kato Show. He was a superstar. Raymond Chow, an ambitious film producer who had just started a new studio called Golden Harvest, recognized the gold mine that had just landed in his lap. Raymond offered Bruce a 2-picture deal. The budget was shoestring. The working conditions were horrific. They traveled to a remote, impoverished village in Pak Chong, Thailand, to shoot the big boss. The heat was suffocating. The food was practically inedible. The stuntmen lacked proper timing, resulting in Bruce taking wheel kicks and punches to his still healing back. They washed up their cuts with cheap alcohol and kept rolling. Bruce directed the fight scenes himself, insisting on bringing his blinding speed and brutal realism to the screen. When The Big Boss premiered in Hong Kong in October 1971, the atmosphere in the theater was electric. As the final credits rolled, the audience sat in absolute stunned silence. Just like the heavyweights of Long Beach years prior, they didn't know how to process what they had just witnessed. They had never seen combat so raw, so fast, so utterly visceral. Then the theater erupted. The roar was deafening. The Big Boss didn't just break box office records. It shattered them into 1,000,000 pieces, outgrossing every Hollywood blockbuster playing in Asia. Bruce followed it up with Fist of Fury and The Way of the Dragon, breaking his own records consecutively. He wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a demigod. Back in Los Angeles, the Warner Brothers executives who had stolen Kung Fu from him were suddenly panicking. The martial arts craze was sweeping the globe, and the undisputed king of it was the very man they had cast aside. Fred Weintraub, an executive at Warner Brothers, finally picked up the phone. He called Hong Kong. He didn't offer a sidekick role. He didn't offer a television pilot. He offered Bruce unprecedented creative control, a massive Hollywood budget, and top billing in a feature film. The movie was Enter the Dragon. It was the ultimate vindication. Bruce Lee had taken the establishment's rejection, absorbed the agony of a broken spine, and forged himself into a global phenomenon. He forced the gates of Hollywood open with his bare hands, proving that true power doesn't come from the size of your muscles or the approval of executives. It comes from an unbreakable will. The heavyweights had laughed. The producers had scoffed. The doctors had warned him. But in the end, when the dragon moved, no one dared speak again. Bruce Lee didn't just break boards. He shattered the limits of human potential and the prejudices of an entire industry. His legacy proves that when the world tells you to step aside, you strike back harder. If you felt the power of the dragon in this story, hit that like button, share this video with a fighter, and subscribe to our channel for more legendary tales of triumph.